In the heart of Vienna, where the elegant Death Café hosts soulful talks of mortality over coffee and strudel, a sinister shadow lurks. 3 patrons, a wealthy banker, a poetic young woman, and a passionate philosopher, meet untimely ends, each death masked as accident or fate. Enter Hercule Poirot, the master detective, whose little gray cells unravel a chilling web of greed, betrayal, and murder. From whispered secrets in candlelit gatherings to a deadly confrontation by the Danube, Poirot exposes a cunning killer hiding among the cafe's eclectic patrons. Will he restore order before death claims another? The truth awaits in the Death Café. Chapter 1. The Invitation to Vienna. The Orient Express glided through the twilight, its polished wood and gleaming brass reflecting the soft glow of lamps in the dining car. Hercule Poirot sat alone at a table draped in crisp white linen, his small, fastidious hands adjusting the alignment of his silverware with meticulous care. His mustache, waxed to precise points, quivered slightly as he sipped a tisane, his sharp green eyes surveying the scene. The clatter of cutlery and the low hum of multilingual conversation filled the air, yet Poirot's attention was fixed on the letter he had received 2 days prior, now resting beside his saucer. The letter, written on heavy cream paper, bore the elegant script of a Frau Clara Vogel, proprietress of a peculiar establishment in Vienna called the Death Café. The name alone had piqued Poirot's curiosity, a café dedicated to discussions of mortality. It was, he thought, a concept both macabre and quintessentially Viennese. Frau Vogel's words were measured, yet beneath her polite tone lay a thread of urgency. "Monsieur Poirot," she had written, "your reputation as a detective of unparalleled insight precedes you. I find myself in need of your unique talents. My café, a place of philosophical discourse, has been touched by troubling events. I fear for its future and beg your assistance." Poirot folded the letter with a crisp motion and tucked it into his waistcoat pocket. His little gray cells, as he was fond of calling them, were already at work, turning over the possibilities. Trouble in a café devoted to death? It suggested a mystery of motive, perhaps of passion or fear, cloaked in intellectual pretense. He glanced at his fellow passengers, a Russian countess in furs, a nervous Englishman clutching a newspaper, a young couple whispering in German. None seemed likely to be connected to Frau Vogel's plight, yet Poirot knew better than to dismiss appearances. The human heart, he mused, was a labyrinth, and Vienna, city of music and secrets, was a fitting stage for such a drama. He leaned back, the rhythm of the train soothing his orderly mind. The invitation had arrived at a fortuitous moment. Poirot had been in London, feeling the weight of idleness after resolving a tiresome case involving a stolen sapphire. The prospect of Vienna, with its grand architecture and air of faded empire, stirred his imagination. More compelling still was Frau Vogel's hint of troubling events. Poirot disliked vagueness, but he relished the challenge of unraveling it. "Mon Dieu," he murmured to himself, "what does one discuss at a death café? The end of life, certainment, but perhaps also the end of someone's patience." The dining car attendant approached, offering a refill of tisane. Poirot declined with a polite wave, his mind drifting to the task ahead. He would arrive in Vienna by morning, and Frau Vogel had promised to meet him at the Westbahnhof. From there, he would be taken to the Death Café, where, no doubt, the threads of this mystery would begin to reveal themselves. He straightened his bow tie ensuring its perfect symmetry, and permitted himself a small smile. The game, as his friend Hastings might say, was afoot. Chapter 2. The Café of Contemplation. Hercule Poirot stepped from the cab onto a cobblestone street in Vienna's Innere Stadt, his patent leather shoes gleaming in the pale morning light. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of roasted chestnuts from a nearby vendor. Before him stood the Death Café, its discreet facade nestled between a bookbinder's shop and a patisserie. The building was narrow, its dark green shutters framing tall windows that reflected the bustle of the street. A wrought iron sign, entwined with delicate ivy, bore the café's name in elegant script. Poirot paused, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. It was, he thought, a place that whispered of refinement, yet its purpose, discussing mortality over coffee, suggested a peculiar boldness. He pushed open the heavy oak door, a small bell chiming to announce his arrival. Inside, the atmosphere was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the chill outside. The walls were lined with dark wood paneling, adorned with framed etchings of Viennese landmarks. Round tables draped in cream linen were scattered across the polished floor, each adorned with a single candle and a vase of white roses. The air was rich with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and warm Apfelstrudel, mingling with the faint tang of pipe smoke. A handful of patrons sat in quiet conversation, their voices low, their faces earnest. A woman approached, her steps quick and purposeful. She was in her late 40s, with ash-blonde hair swept into a neat chignon and piercing blue eyes that betrayed a flicker of anxiety. Her dress, a tailored navy ensemble, spoke of understated elegance. "Monsieur Poirot?" she said, her voice soft but clear, with the precise diction of a well-educated Austrian. "I am Clara Vogel. Welcome to the Death Café. I cannot thank you enough for coming." Poirot inclined his head, his mustache twitching slightly. "Madame Vogel, it is my pleasure. Your letter intrigued me. A café devoted to the contemplation of death? It is most original." Frau Vogel's smile was tight, her hands clasping briefly before her. "It is a place for reflection, monsieur, where people speak freely of life's end. But lately—" She hesitated, glancing toward the patrons. "Please, let us sit. I will explain." She led him to a secluded table in a corner, partially screened by a velvet curtain. As they settled, a young waiter brought a tray with a silver coffee pot and 2 porcelain cups, their edges gilded. Poirot noted the boy's nervous demeanor. His hands trembled slightly as he poured, and filed the observation away. Frau Vogel waited until the waiter retreated before speaking. "Monsieur Poirot," she began, her voice low, "the Death Café is a sanctuary for those who wish to confront mortality without fear. We gather weekly, sharing thoughts, stories, philosophies. It is not morbid, as some assume, but liberating. Yet in the past 3 months, 3 of our regular patrons have died under circumstances I cannot accept as mere chance." Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. "Tell me of these patrons, madame, and of their fates." Frau Vogel's fingers tightened around her cup. "The first was Herr Otto Braun, a retired banker of considerable wealth. He was found in the Danube, drowned, with a high level of alcohol in his blood. The police called it an accident. Then there was Fräulein Clara Lenz, a poetess, barely 25. She fell from her apartment balcony one night. Another accident, they said. Finally, Dr. Ludwig Fischer, a philosopher and our most eloquent speaker, collapsed here in the café, a heart attack, according to the coroner. Each death occurred within days of their last visit here. Poirot leaned forward, his small hands folded neatly. And you suspect, Madame, that these events are connected, that there is, perhaps, a design behind them? I do, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. There is an atmosphere here now, a shadow. Our patrons are fewer, their conversations guarded. I fear someone is using the Death Café as a stage for something sinister. Poirot's mind was already at work, his little gray cells sifting through her words. 3 deaths, each cloaked in the guise of accident or natural cause, yet tied to this singular place. It was, he thought, a puzzle worthy of his attention. Tell me, Madame, who attends these gatherings? Who might have known all 3 victims? Frau Vogel glanced toward the main room, where a few patrons lingered. Our regulars are a varied group. Herr Wilhelm Graf, an undertaker, is a frequent presence, solemn but thoughtful. Fräulein Anna Schmidt, an actress, brings a certain vivacity to our discussions. Professor Ernst Huber, an academic, often dominates with his theories. Then there is Frau Elise Mahler, a widow who speaks of spirits and the afterlife. And of course, my assistant, Herr Karl Neumann, who helps manage the café. Poirot nodded, committing each name to memory. And these individuals, they interacted with the deceased? Oh yes, she said. Otto Braun was a friend to many, though he could be sharp-tongued. Clara Lenz was a favorite, her poetry touching us all. Dr. Fischer was intense. He and Braun occasionally clashed over philosophical matters, but it was never serious, or so I thought. Poirot's gaze drifted to the room, where a tall, gaunt man in a black suit, Herr Graf, he presumed, sat alone, his fingers drumming on the table. A young woman with auburn hair and a theatrical laugh, likely Fräulein Schmidt, was speaking animatedly to an older man with a professorial air, undoubtedly Huber. A woman in a dark shawl, Frau Mahler, sat apart, her eyes fixed on a flickering candle. The assistant, Neumann, hovered near the counter, his movements jerky, his eyes darting. Madame, Poirot said, I should like to attend your next gathering, to observe, to listen. The truth, it often hides in the smallest gestures, the most casual words. Frau Vogel nodded, relief softening her features. Tomorrow evening, monsieur, we meet at 7. You will see for yourself the spirit of our café, and, I hope, uncover what threatens it. Poirot rose, adjusting his hat with a precise tilt. Rest assured, madame, Hercule Poirot does not fail in matters of the truth. He stepped back into the main room, his eyes lingering on the guest book near the entrance. Its leather cover was worn, its pages filled with names and dates. He opened it, scanning the entries. The names of Braun, Lenz, and Fischer appeared frequently, their signatures distinct. Braun's bold, Lenz's florid, Fischer's precise. Beside Fischer's final entry, dated a week before his death, Poirot noticed a faint mark, a crude sketch of a skull drawn in pencil. His mustache twitched. Most curious, he murmured. He closed the book and stepped into the street, the bell chiming behind him. The Death Café, he thought, was a stage indeed, and its players were already revealing themselves. The little gray cells hummed with anticipation. Tomorrow, he would watch, and the truth would begin to take shape. Chapter 3. The Patrons of Mortality. The evening air in Vienna carried a hint of frost as Hercule Poirot approached the Death Café for its weekly gathering. The street was quiet, save for the distant strains of a violin drifting from an open window. The cafe's sign glowed faintly under a gas lamp, its ivy seeming to writhe in the shadows. Poirot adjusted his gloves, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings before he entered. The bell above the door chimed softly, and he was greeted by the familiar warmth of the café, its ambiance now tinged with a subtle tension he had not fully appreciated the previous day. Frau Clara Vogel stood near the entrance, her expression a blend of hospitality and unease. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice low. "I am glad you are here. The gathering is about to begin." She gestured toward a cluster of tables arranged in a loose circle where several patrons were already seated, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of candles. Poirot took a seat at the edge of the circle, his small frame unobtrusive yet commanding attention. He observed the assembled group with the precision of a watchmaker. Herr Wilhelm Graf, the undertaker, sat with his hands clasped tightly, his gaunt face etched with a perpetual frown. His dark suit seemed to absorb the light, and his eyes darted nervously toward the door. Beside him was Fräulein Anna Schmidt, the actress, her auburn hair catching the candlelight as she laughed at her own jest, though Poirot noted a brittleness to her gaiety. Professor Ernst Huber, a stout man with a mane of white hair, adjusted his spectacles and cleared his throat, clearly preparing to dominate the discussion. Frau Elise Mahler, the widow, sat opposite, her dark shawl draped like a mourner's veil, her fingers tracing a rim of her coffee cup, as if seeking answers in its depths. Herr Karl Neumann, the assistant, moved among the tables, refilling cups with a mechanical efficiency, his nervous tic more pronounced tonight. Frau Vogel opened the gathering with a gentle clap. "My friends," she said, "tonight, as always, we come to speak of life's great mystery, its end. Let us share openly, without fear." Her words were met with nods, though Poirot sensed a guardedness in the room, as if each speaker weighed their words against an unseen threat. Fräulein Schmidt was the first to speak, her voice theatrical yet sincere. "I nearly died once, you know," she said, leaning forward, her eyes bright. "On stage, during a performance of Faust, a sandbag fell from the rigging, missing me by inches. It made me think, death is so close, always, yet we dance around it." Her laugh was sharp, and Poirot noted Herr Graf's fingers tighten, his jaw clenching. Professor Huber snorted, adjusting his spectacles. "A theatrical anecdote, Fräulein, but hardly profound. Death is a biological necessity, nothing more. To romanticize it is to misunderstand its function." His tone was dismissive, and Poirot observed Frau Mahler's lips purse, her eyes narrowing. "Perhaps," Frau Mahler said softly, her voice carrying an eerie calm. "Death is more than biology. I feel the presence of those who have passed. They linger, watching." She glanced at the empty chair beside her, as if expecting a spectral guest. The room grew quiet, and Poirot's mustache twitched. Superstition, he thought, but often a mask for deeper truths. Herr Graf spoke next, his voice gruff. "I deal with death daily. It's no mystery, just a job to be done. But people fear it because they fear what they've left undone." His words were clipped, and he avoided meeting anyone's gaze. Poirot noted a faint sheen of sweat on his brow, despite the coolness of the room. The discussion continued, each speaker revealing fragments of their philosophy. Poirot listened intently, his little gray cells cataloging every gesture, every inflection. Fräulein Schmidt's vivacity seemed forced, her glances toward Neumann fleeting but pointed. Professor Huber's arrogance grated on the others, particularly Frau Mahler, whose mystic pronouncements he openly mocked. Graf remained withdrawn, his contributions sparse, while Neumann hovered on the periphery, his nervous energy palpable. As the evening drew to a close, Frau Vogel invited questions. Poirot raised a hand, his voice smooth and deliberate. Madame, Monsieur, Fräulein, you speak of death with such passion. Did your late friends, Herr Braun, Fräulein Lenz, Dr. Fischer, share this fervor? Did they perhaps reveal secrets here that stirred unease? The question hung in the air like smoke. Frau Vogel paled, and Graf's hand froze mid-gesture. Fräulein Schmidt's laugh was a touch too loud, while Professor Huber adjusted his spectacles unnecessarily. Frau Mahler's eyes gleamed, as if Poirot had touched a nerve. They were open, Frau Vogel said carefully. Herr Braun spoke of legacy, Fräulein Lenz of beauty and transience, Dr. Fischer of truth beyond the veil. But secrets? I cannot say. Poirot nodded, his expression inscrutable. Merci, madame. It is merely a thought. But his mind was racing. The tension in the room was no mere philosophical debate. It was personal, visceral. Someone, he was certain, was hiding more than their thoughts on mortality. After the gathering, Poirot lingered as the patrons dispersed. He approached the guest book, its leather cover now familiar. He opened it, his fingers tracing the signatures of the deceased. Braun's bold strokes, Lenz's looping flourishes, Fischer's precise lines, all were there, a silent chorus of the departed. The skull sketch beside Fischer's final entry caught his eye again, its crude lines stark against the page. He turned to Neumann, who was clearing tables nearby. Monsieur Neumann, Poirot said, his tone mild. This sketch, it is yours, non? Neumann flinched, nearly dropping a tray. I doodle sometimes, monsieur. It means nothing. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Everything, monsieur, means something. He closed the book and stepped into the night, the chill air sharpening his senses. The Death Café was a microcosm of human fears and desires, and its patrons were players in a drama yet to be unveiled. The little gray cells, he thought, would have much to ponder before the truth emerged. Chapter 4. The Shadow of Suspicion. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Poirot's suite at the Hotel Sachet, casting delicate patterns on the polished mahogany desk. Hercule Poirot sat with a cup of Café au lait, his notebook open before him, its pages filled with meticulous notes in his precise hand. The events of the previous evening at the Death Café lingered in his mind, each patron's behavior a thread in the tapestry of suspicion he was beginning to weave. The skull sketch, Neumann's nervous tic, the undercurrents of tension among the regulars, all were pieces of a puzzle that demanded clarity. Poirot's little gray cells were restless, urging him to seek answers beyond the café's walls. He donned his overcoat and hat, ensuring the brim was tilted at precisely the correct angle, and set out for the Vienna police headquarters, a grand building of gray stone near the Stephansdom. Inspector Rayner, a stout man with a walrus mustache and a demeanor that suggested efficiency tempered by skepticism, welcomed Poirot into his cluttered office. Monsieur Poirot, Rayner said, offering a chair, your reputation precedes you. Frau Vogel mentioned you might call. You're here about the Death Café business, I presume? Précisément, Poirot replied, seating himself with care to avoid creasing his trousers. I wish to examine the files on the deaths of Herr Otto Braun, Fräulein Clara Lenz, and Dr. Ludwig Fischer. Madame Vogel believes they are not as accidental as they appear." Rainer raised an eyebrow, but fetched 3 manila folders from a cabinet. "The police have closed these cases," he said, handing them over. "Braun drowned, Lenz fell, Fischer had a heart attack. Tragic, but straightforward." Poirot's eyes gleamed as he opened the first folder. The straightforward, Inspector, is often a disguise for the sinister. Let us see what the facts reveal. The file on Otto Braun detailed a man of 62, a retired banker whose body was found in the Danube near a secluded bend. The coroner noted a high blood alcohol level and a bruise on the temple, attributed to a collision with river debris. Fräulein Lenz's file described a fall from her 3rd-floor balcony, her body discovered at dawn by a milkman. No signs of struggle, though a neighbor reported hearing a cry. Dr. Fischer's death was the cleanest, a heart attack in the Death Café, witnessed by patrons with no evidence of poison or trauma. Yet Poirot's mustache twitched as he read. 3 deaths, Inspector, he said, closing the folders. Each tidy, each convenient. Too convenient, perhaps. Rainer shrugged. Coincidences happen, monsieur. Vienna is not without its tragedies. Poirot tapped his temple. The little gray cells, they do not believe in coincidence. I shall investigate further. Leaving the police station, Poirot returned to the Death Café, where the midday crowd was sparse. Frau Vogel was absent, but Herr Karl Neumann was behind the counter, polishing glasses with a rag. His eyes flicked up as Poirot entered, and his nervous tick, a slight twitch of the left cheek, became more pronounced. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice tight, "Frau Vogel is at the market. Can I assist you?" "Perhaps, Monsieur Neumann," Poirot said, his tone genial but probing. "You were close to the patrons, no? You must have overheard many conversations. Tell me, did Herr Braun, Fräulein Lenz, or Dr. Fischer ever speak of disputes? Of enemies, perhaps?" Neumann's hands faltered, the rag slipping slightly. I don't eavesdrop, monsieur, but there were arguments, yes. Herr Braun and Dr. Fischer, they had words a few times, in the back room, after meetings." Poirot leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "And the nature of these words?" Neumann hesitated, his eyes darting to the door as if expecting rescue. "It was about money. Braun had lent Fischer a sum, quite large, I think. Fischer was slow to repay, and Braun was insistent. I heard shouting once, something about a betrayal." "Betrayal," Poirot repeated softly, his mind seizing the word. "And Fräulein Lenz? Did she argue with either man?" Neumann shook his head, but his unease was palpable. "She was quiet, mostly, kept to her poetry, but she was close to Frau Mahler. They talked a lot, in whispers." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "Merci, Monsieur Neumann. You have been most helpful." He turned to leave, but paused at the guest book, flipping to the page with Fischer's final entry. The skull sketch was still there, its lines crude but deliberate. "One more thing," Poirot said, glancing back. "This sketch, it is yours, you admitted. Do you draw such things often?" Neumann's face flushed. "Just a habit, monsieur, and when I'm nervous, it's nothing." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Nothing, monsieur, is ever nothing." He stepped into the street, the bell chiming behind him. The word betrayal echoed in his thoughts. A financial dispute, a whispered confidence, a nervous doodle. These were not mere fragments but clues, each pointing to a motive yet to be uncovered. The The Death Café, he mused, was not just a place of philosophy, but a stage for human passions, and its shadows were growing darker. Chapter 5. The Widow's Tale. The afternoon light filtered through the heavy velvet drapes of Frau Elise Mahler's apartment, casting a muted glow over the cluttered parlor. Hercule Poirot sat on a high-backed chair, its upholstery faded but meticulously clean, his small hands resting on his knees. The room was a curious blend of the mystical and the mundane. A crystal ball sat on a side table beside a chipped teacup, while shelves groaned under the weight of books on spiritualism and ancient lore. The air was thick with the scent of lavender and wax, the latter from a dozen candles flickering in a semicircle on the mantelpiece. Frau Mahler, draped in her habitual dark shawl, sat opposite, her pale hands folded in her lap, her dark eyes fixed on Poirot with an intensity that bordered on unsettling. "Monsieur Poirot," she began, her voice low and deliberate, "I knew you would come. The spirits foretold a seeker of truth." Her fingers brushed the edge of her shawl, as if drawing strength from its folds. Poirot's mustache twitched, his expression one of polite skepticism. "Madame Mahler, I am indeed a seeker of truth, but I rely on the little gray cells, not the whispers of spirits. You spoke last night of sensing a presence, a serpent you called it. I wish to know more of this, and of your connection to the late Fräulein Lenz, Herr Braun, and Dr. Fischer." Frau Mahler's gaze drifted to a candle, its flame dancing as if stirred by her thoughts. "The Death Café is a sacred space, monsieur, where souls confront their mortality, but some bring darkness with them. Dr. Fischer appeared to me in a dream, 3 nights after his passing. He stood at the foot of my bed, his face pale, and spoke of a serpent hiding among us, cloaked in charm." Poirot leaned forward slightly, his eyes sharp. "A serpent, madame? A vivid image. Did this vision name the serpent, or describe its deeds?" She shook her head, her shawl slipping slightly to reveal a silver locket at her throat. "No name, only a warning. Fischer's spirit was troubled, as if bound by unfinished truths. I felt his fear, and his regret." Poirot noted the locket, its surface etched with a faint rose pattern, but pressed on. "And Fräulein Lenz? Frau Vogel mentioned you were close. Did she confide in you? Perhaps about fears or secrets?" Frau Mahler's lips tightened, her fingers brushing the locket absently. "Clara was a poet, monsieur, with a soul too delicate for this world. She came to the café to find meaning in death, but she found fear instead. 2 weeks before her fall, she told me she felt watched, as if eyes followed her in the streets. She was writing a poem, one she would not share fully, but she said it held a truth she dared not speak aloud." Poirot's interest sharpened. "This poem, madame, did she give any hint of its subject?" Frau Mahler hesitated, her eyes darting to the shadows. "She spoke of gold, monsieur, and a betrayal that weighed on her heart. I urged her to tell me more, but she grew pale and said it was too dangerous. The next day, she stopped coming to the café." Poirot's little gray cells hummed, gold and betrayal, words that echoed Herr Neumann's revelation about Braun and Fischer's dispute. He made a mental note to obtain this poem. "And Herr Braun? Dr. Fischer? Did they share such fears?" Frau Mahler's voice dropped to a whisper. "Otto Braun was a man of secrets, always watching, always calculating. He spoke little of himself, but I sensed a coldness in him, as if he guarded something precious. Dr. Fischer was different, passionate but haunted. He once told me he feared his ideas had made enemies, though he would not say who. Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing her words. Madame, you speak of spirits and feelings, but have you observed anything tangible? Any behavior among the cafe's patrons that struck you as unusual? She leaned forward, her voice barely audible. Herr Graf, the undertaker. He is too quiet, monsieur. His eyes follow people, but he says little. And Herr Neumann. He is nervous, always scribbling in that little book of his. Once, I saw him arguing with Fräulein Lenz outside the café. She looked frightened. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Most interesting, madame. One final question. This locket you wear, does it hold significance? Frau Mahler's hand flew to the locket, her face paling. It was a gift from Clara, she said softly. A token of our friendship. She gave it to me the week before she died. Poirot rose, adjusting his coat with precision. Merci, Madame Mahler. Your words have been most illuminating. He stepped into the hall, the scent of lavender fading as he descended the narrow stairs. Outside, the Vienna streets were alive with the clatter of carriages and the chatter of passers-by. But Poirot's thoughts were elsewhere. The locket, the poem, the serpent, each was a clue, pointing to a truth buried beneath the cafe's philosophical veneer. Determined to see Fräulein Lenz's poem, Poirot hailed a cab to her former lodging, a modest boarding house near the Prater. The landlady, a stout woman with a suspicious squint, admitted him after some persuasion, leading him to Lenz's attic room, now stripped of personal effects save for a small trunk. Inside, Poirot found a leather-bound notebook, its pages filled with delicate handwriting. He turned to the final entry, a poem titled The Gilded Cage. One line stood out, written in a trembling hand. The banker's gold hides a bitter truth, locked in a heart that will not yield. Poirot closed the notebook, his mustache twitching. The banker, Otto Braun. The bitter truth, perhaps the betrayal Neumann had mentioned. The Death Café, he thought, was not merely a place of discourse, but a crucible where secrets simmered. Frau Mahler's mystic visions, while fanciful, had pointed him to tangible leads. The locket, the poem, and Neumann's argument with Lenz were threads in a web of deceit, and Poirot was determined to follow them to their source. Chapter 6. The Undertaker's Secret. The Vienna morning was cloaked in a fine mist, the spires of the Stephansdom barely visible as Hercule Poirot made his way to the offices of Herr Wilhelm Graf, the undertaker. The streets were quiet, the cobblestones slick under his polished shoes, and the air carried a faint chill that seemed to mirror the somber nature of his errand. Poirot's mind was a whirl of connections. The poem's allusion to a banker's gold, Frau Mahler's talk of a serpent, Neumann's nervous admission of a dispute between Braun and Fischer. Each clue pointed to a hidden truth, and Graf, with his reticent demeanor and watchful eyes, was the next piece of the puzzle. Graf's establishment was a somber affair, a narrow building of dark stone tucked in a side street near the Zentralfriedhof. The sign above the door was understated, bearing only the words Graf and Sons, Undertakers, in faded gilt. Poirot entered, the bell emitting a low, mournful note. The interior was as he expected, mahogany paneling, a faint scent of formaldehyde, and a hush that seemed to absorb sound. Graf stood behind a counter, arranging papers, his gaunt frame stooped slightly, his black suit impeccable yet severe. His eyes, shadowed and sharp, flicked up as Poirot approached. "Monsieur Graf," Poirot said, removing his hat with a precise flourish. "I am Hercule Poirot. I believe you know why I am here." Graf's face remained impassive, though his fingers paused over the papers. "The Death Café, I presume?" he said, his voice a low rumble. "Frau Vogel mentioned you were inquiring." "Précisément," Poirot replied, his gaze steady. "3 deaths, monsieur. Herr Braun, Fräulein Lenz, Dr. Fischer, all tied to the café where you are a regular. I seek the truth, and I believe you may hold a key to it." Graf's jaw tightened, but he gestured to a small office behind the counter. "Very well, monsieur. Let us speak privately." The office was cramped, its walls lined with ledgers and a single photograph of a stern-faced man, presumably Graf's father. A narrow window admitted a sliver of gray light, casting Graf's features into sharp relief as he sat, his hands clasped tightly. Poirot began, his tone measured. "You prepared Herr Braun's body for burial, did you not? The coroner's report noted a bruise on his temple, yet you attributed it to river debris. A curious oversight, monsieur, for one so experienced in your trade." Graf's eyes narrowed, a faint flush creeping up his neck. "The body was damaged, Monsieur Poirot. The Danube is not gentle. I saw no need to speculate beyond the obvious." Poirot's mustache twitched. "The obvious, Monsieur Graf, is often a veil for the truth. Tell me, did you observe anything unusual about Herr Braun's remains? Or perhaps about his behavior at the café in the weeks before his death?" Graf hesitated, his fingers drumming a slow rhythm on the desk. Braun was agitated in his final days. He spoke less at the meetings, kept to himself. I overheard him once, arguing with Dr. Fischer in the café's back room. Braun was angry, something about money owed, a debt unpaid. Poirot leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "A debt, you say? The same dispute Herr Neumann mentioned. Did you hear more, monsieur? Words of betrayal, perhaps?" Graf's gaze flickered to the window, then back. "I didn't linger. It was their business, not mine. But Braun was a hard man, monsieur. He had enemies. Men like him always do." Poirot nodded, filing the information away. "And Fräulein Lenz? Frau Mahler mentioned you argued with her outside the café. What was the cause?" Graf's face darkened, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "A misunderstanding. Clara, Fräulein Lenz, was upset, said I'd been asking too many questions about her poetry. She was sensitive, you see. I meant no harm." Poirot's expression remained inscrutable. "Sensitive? Oui? But perhaps she feared you had uncovered something she wished to keep hidden. Her poem spoke of a bitter truth tied to a banker's gold. Did you know of this?" Graf shook his head, but his unease was palpable. "I know nothing of her poetry. She was a dreamer, always scribbling. If she had secrets, she kept them from me." Sensing Graf's reticence, Poirot shifted tactics. "Dr. Fischer, then. A man of ideas, passionate, yet haunted, according to Frau Mahler. Did he confide in you, monsieur, or display any fear?" Graf's fingers stilled. "Fischer was intense, always talking of truth and legacy. He didn't fear death, he welcomed it in a way. But he was cautious lately, kept looking over his shoulder as if expecting trouble." Poirot's little gray cells were alight. Graf's answers, while guarded, confirmed a pattern of tension among the deceased, centered on Braun's wealth and Fischer's debts. Yet Graf's own demeanor, his reluctance, his nervous gestures, suggested he knew more than he admitted. Poirot rose, adjusting his coat. Merci, Monsieur Graf. You have given me much to consider. Leaving the undertaker's office, Poirot decided to visit the site of Braun's death. He hailed a cab to the Danube's banks, where the river flowed sluggish and gray under the mist. The spot where Braun's body was found was secluded, shielded by drooping willows and a crumbling stone wall. Poirot paced the bank, his eyes scanning the ground. The police report had mentioned no signs of struggle, but Poirot's keen gaze caught a faint indentation in the mud, partially obscured by leaves, a mark that could have been made by a heavy object or a scuffle. He crouched, his gloved fingers brushing the earth. Mon Dieu, he murmured. A man does not drown so neatly, not with a bruise on his temple. The willows, he noted, hid the spot from the nearby path, making it an ideal place for a private confrontation or a crime. The little gray cells hummed. Braun's death was no accident, and Graf's oversight of the bruise was no mere error. The undertaker, Poirot suspected, was concealing a truth, perhaps to protect himself or another. Returning to his hotel, Poirot sat at his desk, his notebook open. He sketched a diagram of the cafe's patrons, connecting their names with lines of motive and opportunity. Braun's wealth, Fischer's debt, Lenz's poem, Graf's reticence, Neumann's nervousness, all were threads in a web of deceit. The Death Café, he thought, was a stage where human frailties played out, and the next act was approaching. He resolved to gather all the players for a final reckoning, where the truth would be laid bare. Chapter 7. The Gathering of Truth. The Death Café was bathed in the soft glow of its candles, their flames casting flickering shadows on the dark wood paneling. The air was heavy with the scent of coffee and anticipation, as Hercule Poirot stood at the center of the room, his small, immaculate figure commanding the attention of all present. Frau Clara Vogel had arranged the gathering at his request, ensuring the presence of the key figures, Herr Wilhelm Graf, Fräulein Anna Schmidt, Professor Ernst Huber, Frau Elise Mahler, and Herr Karl Neumann. The tables were pushed back, forming a semicircle around Poirot, who stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his mustache perfectly symmetrical, his eyes gleaming with the clarity of revelation. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice clear and deliberate. Tonight, we gather not to discuss death in the abstract, but to confront a darkness that has tainted this café. 3 souls, Herr Otto Braun, Fräulein Clara Lenz, and Dr. Ludwig Fischer, have met their ends under circumstances most suspicious. I, Hercule Poirot, declare that these were not accidents, but murders, orchestrated with cunning and cloaked in deception. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Frau Vogel's hand flew to her throat, while Graf's gaunt face grew paler. Fräulein Schmidt's theatrical smile faltered, Professor Huber's spectacles slipped down his nose, and Frau Mahler's fingers tightened on her shawl. Neumann, standing near the counter, froze, his nervous tic betraying his unease. Poirot raised a hand, silencing the murmurs. Let us begin with the facts, which the little gray cells have pieced together. Herr Braun, a wealthy banker, was found drowned in the Danube, a bruise on his temple dismissed as river damage. Yet the secluded spot where he died suggests a struggle, not an accident. Fräulein Lenz, the poetess, fell from her balcony, but her poem spoke of a bitter truth tied to a banker's gold, and she feared being watched. Dr. Fischer, the philosopher, succumbed to a heart attack here in this very room, yet his death was too convenient, too sudden. He paced slowly, his polished shoes clicking on the floor. These deaths are linked by this café, and by a motive rooted in betrayal and greed. Herr Braun, we learn, had lent money to Dr. Fischer, a debt that caused heated arguments. Fräulein Lenz, with her poet's intuition, uncovered a secret tied to Braun's wealth, a secret she dared not speak aloud but hinted at in her verse. And the skull sketch in the guest book, drawn by Herr Neumann, marks the thread that binds these tragedies. Neumann's face crumpled, his hands trembling. I didn't mean," he stammered, but Poirot's gaze silenced him. "Monsieur Neumann," Poirot continued, turning to the assistant, "you admitted to a dispute between Braun and Fischer, overheard in the back room. But it was not Fischer who owed Braun. It was you. A loan, substantial and unpaid, weighed heavily on you. Braun, a man of ruthless precision, threatened to expose your financial ruin. In a moment of desperation, you met him by the Danube, argued, and struck him with a blunt object, causing the bruise. You pushed him into the river, hoping it would appear an accident. The room was deathly still. Neumann's eyes darted toward the door, but Inspector Raynor, summoned discreetly by Poirot, stood ready in the shadows. Poirot turned to the others. "Fräulein Lenz, observant and sensitive, overheard your argument with Braun, Monsieur Neumann. Her poem, with its talk of gold and betrayal, was a veiled accusation. You followed her, watched her, and when she grew too close to the truth, you pushed her from her balcony, staging another accident." Fräulein Schmidt gasped, her hand covering her mouth, while Professor Huber muttered something inaudible. Frau Mahler's eyes were fixed on Poirot, as if seeing her spectral warnings confirmed. "And Dr. Fischer," Poirot continued, his voice rising slightly. "He, too, suspected foul play. His philosophical debates with Braun masked a deeper tension, perhaps over the same debt you, Monsieur Neumann, could not repay. Fischer's questions grew too pointed, his presence too dangerous. So you turned to a subtler method, a poison administered in his coffee, designed to mimic a heart attack. The Death Café, with its open discussions, provided the perfect stage for such a crime." Neumann staggered back, his voice a hoarse whisper. "It was an accident. Braun. He pushed me too far. I didn't mean to kill him. And Clara, she was going to tell everyone. Fischer, he wouldn't stop asking questions." His words dissolved into a sob as he sank to his knees. Inspector Raynor stepped forward, his hand firm on Neumann's shoulder. "Herr Neumann, you will come with me," he said, his tone final. The assistant offered no resistance, his head bowed as he was led away. Poirot turned to the others, his expression softening. "Mesdames et messieurs, the truth is often painful, but it restores order. The Death Café may now reclaim its purpose, free from the shadow of murder." Frau Vogel approached, her eyes brimming with gratitude. "Monsieur Poirot, you have saved us. How can I ever repay you?" Poirot's smile was modest. "Madame, the satisfaction of the little gray cells is payment enough, but perhaps a small slice of your excellent Apfelstrudel before I depart." The tension in the room broke with a ripple of nervous laughter. Poirot adjusted his hat, his work in Vienna nearly complete. The Death Café, he thought, was a microcosm of human nature, its fears, its secrets, its capacity for both good and evil. And in its heart, the truth had prevailed. Chapter 8. The Restoration of Order. The morning sun rose over Vienna, painting the rooftops with a golden sheen as Hercule Poirot stood at the platform of the Westbahnhof, his suitcase neatly packed and his overcoat buttoned against the autumn chill. The Orient Express awaited, its gleaming carriages a promise of the journey back to London. Poirot's mustache was impeccably waxed, his hat tilted at its customary angle, and his eyes carried the quiet satisfaction of a case resolved. The Death Café, once shadowed by murder, was now free to resume its philosophical purpose, and Poirot's little gray cells were at peace. The previous evening's denouement lingered in his mind. Herr Karl Neumann's tearful confession, prompted by Poirot's relentless logic, had unraveled the web of deceit that bound the deaths of Otto Braun, Clara Lenz, and Ludwig Fischer. The café, with its earnest discussions of mortality, had been a stage for human frailty, greed, fear, and desperation cloaked in intellectual discourse. Poirot had seen such motives before, but the setting, so uniquely Viennese, had lent the affair a particular poignancy. Frau Clara Vogel had visited him at the Hotel Sacher that morning, her face radiant with relief. "Monsieur Poirot," she had said, pressing a parcel wrapped in brown paper into his hands, "you have given us back our sanctuary. The Death Café will thrive again, thanks to you. Please, accept this, a token of our gratitude." Poirot had unwrapped the parcel to find a tin of the café's finest Apfelstrudel, its aroma rich with cinnamon and apples. He had smiled, his sense of order momentarily disrupted by the temptation. "Madame," he said, "you are too kind, but Hercule Poirot, he prefers his diet to be as symmetrical as his investigations. I shall enjoy this in moderation." Now, as he stood on the platform, the parcel tucked safely in his suitcase, Poirot reflected on the case. Braun's death by the Danube, marked by a telltale bruise, Lenz's fall, prompted by her dangerous knowledge, Fischer's poisoned coffee, disguised as a heart attack, all had been orchestrated by Neumann, a man driven to murder by the weight of debt and fear of exposure. The skull sketch, a nervous habit, had been the final thread that led Poirot to the truth, its crude lines a silent confession in the guest book. The other patrons, Graf, Schmidt, Huber, Mahler, had played their parts, their secrets and tensions illuminating the motive. Graf's reticence had masked his discomfort with Braun's ruthless nature. Schmidt's theatrics had hidden her awareness of the café's undercurrents. Huber's arrogance had blinded him to the danger. Mahler's mysticism, while fanciful, had pointed to the fear that permeated the group. Each, in their way, had contributed to the atmosphere that allowed Neumann's crimes to flourish unnoticed. A whistle sounded, and Poirot boarded the train, settling into his compartment with the precision of a man who valued order above all. As the Orient Express pulled away from Vienna, he gazed out at the receding city, its spires fading into the mist. "The human heart," he murmured, "it is like a Viennese waltz, elegant, complex, and sometimes treacherous. But always the little gray cells, they find the rhythm of truth." He opened his notebook, its pages filled with the neat script of his observations, and added a final note. "The Death Café, Vienna. Truth restored, order prevails." Closing the book, he leaned back, the gentle sway of the train lulling his thoughts. The case was closed, the café cleansed, and Hercule Poirot was ready for whatever mystery awaited next.